And welcome to Impact 2023. It's our continuing conversation where we talk about current events, current issues, um, topics that are popping up, all types of things. And this is our opportunity in your free space where you can communicate, talk about the issues that you want to talk about, and have your input into what we're talking about. And we ask that you type your questions and your comments into the comment section because this is a conversation. It goes, you know, both ways. So um, if you want to participate and you want the conversation to go on and it's not just me talking, then please feel free to type your questions and your comments into the comment section. And so, as always, we ask that you participate with us as we dive into our topics. Now, we've delved into a bunch of topics recently, a bunch of different things. We've been all over the place. Where we talked about things from an economic standpoint. We're looking at where we are economically. We've talked about a bunch of different social issues. We've really wrapped around kind of the whole spectrum of things that have been going on lately. And I guess today will be no different. It's the same situation. But if you're here in Virginia, in certain places, today is Tuesday, which is election day. And as always, there is a number of people who go out and they vote, and there are a number of people who don't. And we're going straight to the point and very, very basic. This is not political or anything like that. But as Christian individuals, do you have a responsibility to vote? As moral people, I guess, is there a responsibility to vote? And so when we sit back and we look at it, and that's the question du jour, or the question of the day, is do we have a responsibility to vote? Now we know that as a social, there's a social responsibility, and so as me looking at myself as a man of color, there's a responsibility based on history that I have to vote and participate in the process. There's a responsibility I have because I have children to vote and participate in the process, because the elected officials determine schools, school districts, depending on if I'm looking for the school board or voting for school board. When you're looking at mayor or you're looking at city council and things, it's talking about the funding for schools. So as a parent, I have a responsibility to exercise my right to vote. Again, as a person of color, I sit back and, there are policies and procedures that are going on all the time that affect whether or not people of color, myself and others, will be able to get a fair shake in society. And so those are things that weigh on me. And that's my personal choices. But is there a religious component to the voting? Is there a religious responsibility to vote? Now, is it specifically in the Bible? There is no verse that I've seen that has specifically said, you need to vote. You have to vote. You have to cast your vote. There's no reference there that says that that's a requirement. But as we look back, and so we're not saying this is whether or not it's a sin or not to vote, because that's silly. That's not the question that's being put up. The question more so is that is there a responsibility, or do we think there's a responsibility, a moral and responsibility to vote, to participate? And let me tell you why I can lean towards yes. One of the common themes that we've talked about here is relationships. And one of the common things that we've talked about here is community. And one of the common themes that we've talked about here is neighbors. And so if you're going to be in relationship with other people, you're going to be in community, you're going to be a neighbor, then you have to care what's going on with those who are around you. If you care about what's going on with those around you, you have to care about what is affecting those around you. And so as the laws, as the rules of society are being put into place, if you care about those who are around you, then you must participate in that process because those are things that affect their lives. Let me give you a good example. So over people have been losing their houses since the beginning of time. People lose their houses for a number of different reasons. One reason that people lose their houses is because they don't pay their taxes. And so what has happened over time is that the government was able to, you haven't been paying your taxes, the government will come in, and what they will do is they will sell your home. What recently happened was that the Supreme Court decided that they would no longer allow governments to sell homes and then keep the additional profit. One such case happened, and the case that happened with the Supreme Court was that it was a 90-plus-year-old woman who owned her home, but then she ended up going to a facility. And while she was at the facility, and living in the facility, so a community for older people. And while she was there, she didn't keep up on the taxes and payments for her home that she originally had still owned. And so she went in the hole by $2,000. And then the city decided that they were going to sell it. And after fees and everything like that, I think it came up to about 15 grand. And so they sold the house somewhere between 25 to 40 grand, and the city kept all of the additional profit. So they didn't cut her a check. So they sold it, they covered all of the costs, which was the 15 grand, and then they kept all the additional. And what happened was that the Supreme Court, or the courts, decided that this was no longer fair. Like this is not something that governments should be able to do. They should not be able to seize your stuff and then keep all the additional profit. And so the way that most of us know things, if we're not in one of these locales where they have some shady activities, most of us know things. Whereas if a car is taken or a home is taken and they sell it at auction, then if they sell it above price or to cover all the costs, then you should be able to get the additional back because you owned it. Well, that was now codified in the law. This is a long story of moving around. One of the reasons that this was able to happen is because the judges that they put in place were put in place by officials who were elected. And so in some locales, these are at the federal level, this is at some locales, you have federal judges put in by different presidents. You have federal judges put in at different points. Some judges get elected, and you have people at different points of the process. You have to vote for that. Now, we all can sit here, I think, collectively and say it is wrong for a 90-year-old woman to lose her home and then also lose the additional money when it's sold. They should give that to her because that's hers. It was her home. And if you only went down $15,000 and you sold it for over somewhere between 25 and 40, you should get the additional. We can all see that clearly with our eyes. I think that's not really a debatable situation. But in order for that to happen, we have to vote to put the right people in place. And so this is a long-winded way. And that story kind of fits back of why it's important to vote, because you have to vote to put the right things into play in order to care for your neighbor, in order to care about community, in order to care about relationships. And so I believe that there is a responsibility. You can't talk about how much the community is and how much the relationship is if you're not going to put the time in to make sure that the people who make decisions are not making good ones for the whole community and for the whole relationships. And so a lot of us, sometimes I think we want to ignore what's going on around us. We want to say, well, elections don't matter. We want to say the politics don't matter. We want to say that, government and governance, for the most part, they really don't affect our lives and they don't matter. But I think as a church, in order to love thy neighbor, in order to be in community, in order to be in relationships, in order to care about the person that's next to you, we have an obligation to vote. And let me know if you disagree. And I think it's a strong case there that we have to participate in the process, even though it's not fun all the time. And so when we sit back and they talk about the separation of church and state, and I get that, and we used to have more so than now because they monitor it a lot more now. But we used to have a lot of political participation inside of the church. You got politicians coming to the church to speak. You have, polling places inside of churches, voting places inside of churches. you had a lot of community activities and political activities where you bring in people to talk and to share their views and just participate in church. And I think one of the reasons for that is if anybody is going to participate in the electoral process, if anybody's going to care about their community, it should be people who care about the community. And so as the church, if we care about our community, that's what we're supposed to do. I think we have that obligation that we have to participate in the voting process. I think it's necessary. And so if somebody came up and they asked the question of, well, as a Christian, do I have a responsibility to vote? I believe that the answer is yes. And these are the reasons why. Because we are in relationship with one another, we're building community, and if we love thy neighbor, then we have to be interested and invested in the policies and procedures that affect our neighbor. And it goes back to one of the things that we talked about before. What we're not allowed to do as Christians, I believe, is that we're not allowed to not pay attention. I think that is in direct conflict with what the Word of God is saying. It's in direct conflict with, when we're ignoring what's going on. Again, I reference it all the time, but it goes back to the Good Samaritan situation. What happened in that, in that story is that people were ignoring the man who was beaten and robbed, and you have people ignoring him, and so you're ignoring situations. And as the story of the Good Samaritan, the Samaritan is the one who didn't ignore the situation and held up their responsibility to their neighbor or to others. And so I think that we all have to be that way. So we can't sit back and say, well, oh man, there's some laws out there that are unjust and unfair. It is what it is. Or we choose, well, I don't like the news, or I don't like all that politics mess, so I don't pay attention. Unfortunately, I think that goes in direct conflict with loving thy neighbor. That goes in direct conflict with being a good Samaritan. That goes in direct conflict because you have to pay attention in order to be a help. And so I do think if somebody comes up and they say, as a Christian, do I have a responsibility to vote? I absolutely think so. And I think the Bible backs that up. I think the teachings of Jesus Christ backs that up in the sense of we have an obligation. It's not fun for most. Some people love that stuff. Some people love to get all into the government and the politics and the policies that go on and love to debate. But there is a responsibility there because you have to be informed. But I think that responsibility, again, it is there for us because we have to, in order to be a good neighbor, we have to participate in the process of taking care of our neighborhoods. In order to be in community, we have to participate in the process in order to take care of the community. In order to be in relationships, we have to make sure that we are participating in the process of things that affect our relationships. And that's why I think we talk about that a lot here and a lot everywhere. And so when you hear people railing against a particular policy or a particular thing, that's our responsibility. That is definitely our responsibility. There is no true separation, of church and state. And so I think that's where we are. So no real comments on that one. So I guess we're all in agreement on that in our responsibility there. One other thing with that, just because we have a responsibility to, I believe that we have a responsibility to be a part of the process, the voting. I don't think that we have a responsibility to participate in the mess or even run. So, how a lot of people want to be politicians. I don't think the responsibility is there. Now, that's an option. That's if you want to do that, that's whatever. But I don't think that is a responsibility. It's great when people want to be leaders, political leaders in government and things like that. But I don't think that that's the same responsibility there. I think our responsibility is to make sure that things get done right, but our responsibility is not necessarily to be those individuals and those people. Why would I say that? And the reason I say that is because I think that those games that people play sometimes corrupts people, and I don't think that that's something that you necessarily need to get involved with if you don't want to. So that's an outside desire. I don't see a lot of the church. You should be a politician because the church. I don't see a lot there. There's a lot of rough and tumble stuff that goes on with politicians and political leaders, and that game that you have to play. Or let me clear that up. The game that we want people to play, because as voters we continuously vote game players in there. So the game that we want them to play, they play. So the game that we want our political leaders to play, they play, and that's going to continue on until we do something different. But yeah. I don't think that we have an obligation to be political leaders. I don't think we have an obligation to run. If that's who you want to be, I think that is absolutely great. But I'm only sitting here and saying that I think we have an obligation to participate in the process. But I don't think we have an obligation to have to be the ones who are the elected officials. And that's just a choice that you have to make personally. All right. That was pretty quick. So we're just straight to the point on this one today. All right. Well, with that being said, I want to remind you of our upcoming events. Thursday, our weekly Bible study. Please join us. That's at 7:00, same place, here on YouTube and Facebook. On Sunday, we have worship service, same place, 10:00, and we also have it in person. And also, for any of you who are in the Richmond, Highland Springs, Virginia area, we are having a game night here. And I don't know the date. I will say whatever this Friday is, the 23rd. And we're having a game night here from 7 until. So please feel free to stop in, play cards, play board games, play whatever. I was talking to some kids not too long ago, older kids, not even young kids, like high school. And they were telling me how they don't know how to play cards, never play cards. Amazed me, because that's not something that I expect kids to say. I expect all kids to have played some kind of card game, Go Fish or something. And so it's just an opportunity for people to come together in relationship, in community, with one another, and as neighbors. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Please feel free to join us again next week as we dive into the community issues, current events. As always, thank you and have a good one.